StoryWork is brought to you in partnership with Slingshot. Slingshot are Australia's creative media experts, and having worked successfully with them for years, I'm thrilled to have them on board.
You're listening to a DM podcast.
And so we saw just exponential growth, particularly based on female influencers who had extremely trusting relationships with people.
You know, I look back and go, why did people invest? Would I today? I
don't know that I'd invest
I hope
in
that
me.
I would have had the wisdom to invest in Four Pillars or the Daily Aus. I look back and go, the only reason for them to do that was because of the people.
Yeah, they believed in Sam and Zara, and that is a huge honour and a huge respect. We as a business need to be keeping up with these trends, not waiting for them to happen, because we need to be ahead of them.
I will now say, and I will, on the record here, I will credit you every time, stack onto existing habits.
Yeah,
Hack
it works.
the existing
There's
habits.
a lot of research. It works.
Well, hi friends, welcome to StoryWork. My name is Matt Jones, and whether you caught the incredible conversation we had with Dom Pym on the last episode, or whether this is your first time here, welcome. It's good to be with you. Over the past 30 years, I've had experience across politics, brand building, marketing, and business, and I can tell you with certainty that one of the multi-billion-dollar questions being asked around the world in boardrooms and meeting rooms right now is, how do we get Gen Zs on board? How do we win over the emerging Gen Alphas? And if you're wondering the same thing, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're building, you need to listen to my guest today, Zara Seidler. Zara co-founded the Daily Aus with her business partner, Sam Kozlowski. And what they have built is extraordinary. It's a brilliant reminder of the power and the importance of storytelling. But maybe what's even more impressive is how they've built it and what it can teach all of us about how to build a business, build a community, and create a movement amongst these critical younger generations. I cannot wait for you to hear Zara's amazing mind at work. So let's dive straight in. Zara, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
So let's go back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Zara and Sam are sitting, at the dinner table, in a cafe, in a kitchen, whatever, and you're talking about, why don't our friends care about the news?
Yeah.
Why did you care that they care?
Good question. Why did I care? Honestly, it was probably selfish. I think I cared because I wanted more people to be able to talk about it with, and I wanted them to understand why it was so important. And I think, looking back, the distinction I'll make is that my friends then and my friends now do care. They didn't have the right language to be talking about these world issues because the news wasn't written for them. It wasn't pitched to them. And so when I look back at it then, the frustration was, why are people my age not engaged? But they are. It was just kind of the wrong packaging for them. And that's what we've been trying to build ever since.
So as you start to build and you're trying to solve this challenge of engagement and relevance and trust, how did you process that? Were you thinking from the beginning, we're building a business here, we're building a media empire here, just as one viewer, one listener, one audience member at a time? Or were you just focused on, how do we solve this creative problem?
The benefit of you only interviewing me and not interviewing my co-founder is that we can have very different answers. So had you asked Sam that, he would have said from the beginning, yep, I'm building a media business. I remember he put it on LinkedIn that he was the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and I laughed at the time and said, who cares? That's not a business. That's not for LinkedIn. I thought of it as just a kind of community project that was going to get young people involved in the news. I never thought it would be a business. I didn't believe I was entrepreneurial in that way, and I didn't know anyone around me who was doing those sorts of things. But over time, I think the mission became so critical that there was a business case to be made around it. But it was only after consistently building that editorial integrity and that trust that we were able to make the business case. It certainly, I don't think, would have worked had that business case come first. We were solving a really big moral question for young Australians.
Do you remember some of the things that you were doing in your first year that you look back now and go, we would never do that, but it felt right to try, but your model has significantly evolved from then?
I mean, like we posted notes apps, screenshots as story. Like who wants to read that? That is like the least design friendly thing on earth. But it was all that allowed for when I was on my way to work on the bus and taking screenshots and putting it up. So that built consistency, it built habit. It was something that was important. It looked absolutely hideous. And thank God for Canva and thank God for what we were able to design down the track. But no, it was awful, but it was the foundation. And all that mattered at the end of the day was the facts.
It's really interesting. Something you said before about, you don't ascribe too much sort of brilliance and genius, not your words, my words, to what you did in the early days. It is interesting though, isn't it, how you sort of start to create these little senses of how things work and how the pieces connect together. So at Four Pillars, we used to talk about social doesn't sell. And it kept us really honest about the idea that we use social media to create engagement and community to draw people closer, get them into our email lists, and email would sell and social would engage. And I watch all these brands these days just flooding their socials with sales push. And I'm like, you're not building brand, you're not building audience. I asked you about the battle for attention and your response was basically, we don't fight for attention. We fight for discovery in social. And then we pull people into this place of these owned audiences where we have their full attention.
Yeah.
It's really important, isn't it, to have these little visual and sort of mental constructs of how our business works.
I mean, the funnel matters for every business, not just for ours. But I think that for us, it's how can you build an ecosystem? If we're saying that news is so foreign to so many people, how can you build an ecosystem that is kind of all encompassing? And for us, that's bringing people down the funnel. That's bringing people from that rented audience to that owned audience. And I think the same is true for other businesses as well.
I see it a bit more these days, less a funnel, more as like a benign Death Star, that you're trying to draw people in with this tractor beam, and they may come from many different directions and many different places, and just every time they touch you, you're trying to bring them a bit closer and a bit closer until at some stage they're in the middle and they're almost part and they see themselves as part of you.
But I think what's important for us is that the way that other outlets have done that is through clickbait, and that you draw them in and then they're in and they feel trapped. And for us, it's like, no, you know what you're coming into. You have full knowledge. Like we don't have a paywall. You are getting everything that you want on socials, but it's that you want more and that you can have a deeper relationship with this brand. And so I think the hesitancy and the trouble there is around clickbait and bringing people down and attracting them perhaps on a basis that they're not 100% bought into.
How important is it that news becomes a habit, and how conscious were you that you weren't trying just to create engagement and build trust, that you were actually trying to retrain people into the habit of becoming news consumers?
The most important thing, habit and building routine around news. The number one thing that I heard from people was, I'm not a news person. That's not a thing. You aren't either a news person or not a news person. It's just either in your routine or it's not in your routine. And what we wanted to do was intercept those non-news readers or those passive news readers and make them more active news readers. And so that meant showing up at the same time every single day, no matter what I was doing, where I was. And sometimes that was hard. Sometimes that was easy. It depended on the day. But it meant that people could start to rely on us and depend on us and build in that consistency into their day. And I think that we were able to then convert a really significant cohort from being those passive consumers to being more active news consumers, which I think is pretty good for democracy.
It is. And we're going to talk about democracy because
that small topic.
It's a small topic. Some of us think it's important. But let's stay on this notion of habit. We buy cars. We're in the habit of buying a new car every, 4, 5, 6 years. And I start a new car company. I'm just trying to interrupt your likelihood to buy a Volkswagen and buy my car. But I'm not fundamentally trying to change your habits.
Yeah.
But then there are people going, no one's sitting around going, I wish there was more news I could consume.
Yeah.
And yet for you to successfully build a business, you have to create a new habit. I'm just interested in what you have learned, that if you got dropped into another business, another category tomorrow, what has it taught you about how to build habits that didn't previously exist? Because fundamentally your success relied on your ability to do that.
Well, I think what's important is that we identified what habits did exist in the cohort that we were trying to target. And what we knew existed was that young people were checking social media all the time. when we started, there was not really any news on Instagram. This was kind of a very novel concept. I remember having an early conversation with Instagram and them saying, we don't want news on here. That's not what this is for. So we were able to interrupt and almost collide with another habit. And this might sound a bit woo-woo, but like this idea of habit stacking. So if you're on social media and then you're getting your news, you're almost stacking the habit of doom scrolling with getting some important information. And I think that that's a really easy way to bring something that is quite hard and quite limiting to new audiences. And so I think that's been important, and that's been a really interesting learning for me, is that you can't pull people away from their existing habits or their existing consumption, trends. What we've seen is that other outlets have tried to say, yeah, you're on social media, but click out to this link and then click out to that link. Those don't mimic the natural habits. And what we did was we brought it to them. We want to meet people where they're at. And I think that works across any industry and any product. You don't try to disrupt that. You try to build within the ecosystem that already exists.
I will now say, and I will, on the record here, I will credit you every time. Stack onto existing habits.
Yeah,
hack
it works.
The existing
There's
habits.
a lot of research. It works.
None of us have enough firepower to persuade people to build entirely new habits. But that notion of stacking, oh my God, I love that so much. Okay, so from habit stacking for your first users to starting to see that next wave of growth. And I can talk a bit about what I experienced in terms of stacking on the existing habits of drinking mostly, to be honest, Hendrick's gin and shifting people to 4 Pillars. Yeah. There was a first group who were relatively easy to convert because they were so ready to be engaged. They were so hungry. They were like, the thirsty man in the desert. It's like, okay, but then there was this next group that they weren't waiting for us. And so I realized quite early on we had to do different things to win them. Did you have that same moment where you're like, okay, the first group we've got are not going to give us all the growth we need. We need to start figuring out how to reach the next growth audience.
100%. I mean, so for a very long time, it's very easy to condense timelines when you're looking back at the last however many years. For the first 3 years, no one bothered to care what we were doing. We were building habit, but it was very slow, very minor. No one really cared. Over that time, we accumulated some 3,000 followers, nothing to write home about. But from there onwards, it's like, all right, so maybe the people I know are connected to 3,000 people at a stretch. But how do we reach those new audiences who aren't finding us? There's no discoverability to what we're doing. Influencers turned out to be a huge part of that early growth. So we thought back then that what we were doing was almost a civic duty. We said, you're all talking about all of this very important stuff on the internet. We've got influencers who are being asked to comment on, say, global conflicts, but have no facts and have no basis for what they're actually being asked to talk about when they were Miss Universe and are now apparently, a global conflict expert. And so we reached out to these influencers, and it was Sam and I DMing people after work, just saying, hey, we can see that you're being asked to comment on this. If you want an explainer that makes sense and that other people can, engage with and relate to, here you go. And what we saw was that these influencers really took to it because there was something there that it wasn't partisan. It wasn't going to isolate certain audiences. It was just going to have an explanatory angle. And so we saw just exponential growth, particularly based on female influencers who had extremely trusting relationships with people. And they were saying for more, read the Daily Aus. And that's where our exponential growth came from during COVID, during the US election, and then beyond.
And was that a conscious growth strategy? To what extent was it accidental and organic? And to what extent was it, okay, we've won this first 3,000, but what got us here isn't going to get us where we want to go. We need deliberately to sort of punch out of our own bubble.
Yeah. I hesitate to assign any formal value to anything we did back then because it was just like, let's throw something at a wall and see what sticks. And what I think has been so fundamental to our success is that I am a young woman who is trying to cater to other young women. I knew where I got my information from. I knew who I trusted, and it was these creators. And so we were almost just translating this anecdotal evidence of my friends and I getting our information from one place. Is that a broader trend? And it turns out that part of the value of being the audience you're trying to serve is that, yes, that does have legs.
So it was almost like with, you had the habit stacking approach, and this was almost trust stacking.
100%.
These young women trust these young women. There is a trust-based relationship there. If we could insert our trusted contemporary approach to news into that, again, the habit and the trust, they all start to compound.
And it's unusual. Like you don't usually, I mean, maybe now there's been a bit of a change, and certainly in the last couple of years, but when we started, influencers and news in the same sentence was not necessarily something you were going to hear. And so it was, again, trying to do something a bit different and trying to make the news a bit cool again, which I think it had not been for quite a while. For us, we started as an explainer page, and I think that just remaining true to that mission, which is that we don't need to be first, we need to be right, and we need to be able to add value, not, add noise to an issue or a problem or a topic. For us, that is where we add value. So, we're not going to be first. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of reporters around the world. What we can do is sit with it a bit longer and take the time to actually explain it and break it down for an audience. And so I think we've always been able to navigate the tension because our audience expects that of us, and we know that that is our role, and that is how we differentiate ourselves from other players in the game who can be much faster and have a huge number of resources that they can allocate to this sort of stuff. And that is what good journalism is about. And that's why we need an ecosystem with those legacy players as well as some of the newer players.
Every time I give a keynote or I give a talk or have like a fireside chat, people want to know this sort of, why did you sell 4 Pillars? And had you planned from the beginning to build it, to sell it? And my honest answer is no, we built it to own it. And then I check myself and I go, well, wait a minute, we did raise investment at the beginning. So in the back of my mind, there must have been this sense that we're going to have to get these guys some money back at some stage.
Yeah.
Like even if we 3 founders choose to stay in forever and pass the business down to our kids, there were 20 and then eventually like 35 people had invested. So I'm like, in the back of my mind, that must have been there. But I think we were made better as a business because what dominated our minds was always how do we make better gin and how do we build a better gin brand, not how do we scale this to sell. I would never invest in a founder who in the early stages of their business was more concerned about the scale of their exit than the scale of the solution of the problem that they were going to deliver.
100%. And I mean, especially, I don't know about the gin business. You don't invest in a media business to make a huge return. This is not a quick money sale. This is not what this business is about. As I said, the same thing is true of trust as it is about building a revenue model that works. It's really hard and it takes a really long time. And we've also raised investment. We've raised 2 rounds and we've raised that from people who understand that very reason, that it will not be the next Afterpay or the next Canva. This is something that they have invested in because their kids care about what we do, or they can see the value and they believe that they want to be part of that story. And so certainly not something that tomorrow will be worth $1 bajillion. But yeah, we've raised investment and that's something you need to always keep one eye on.
I'm a big fan of this idea that great businesses are built on doing really difficult things. That this is not a world where ease is rewarded. Difficulty, pain is rewarded. And I think there were a couple of things at 4 Pillars that we spotted that were hard to do. It was hard to get up every day and just put all of your focus into making a better product because the whole world was like, well, just make the product as quickly and cheaply as you can and then move on to marketing. We're like, well, no, we're going to build a business around making. But the other thing that we saw, and this is a long time ago because I'm tragically old, is social media was just emerging and it was scary and difficult for the big legacy players to jump onto. But for us, we could build social first. What did you quickly sort of see or feel or intuit that you could do that the big legacy media players, the big legacy news organizations just either wouldn't do or couldn't do?
I think being nimble is something that very few media companies can claim they are. We were able to, take COVID as an example. We were still not a real business then. We were kind of still in side hustle phase. We were able to pivot. We were able to innovate. We were able to present information in a way that we hadn't previously because there was no red tape. There was nothing stopping us from that innovation. And I think what we've seen with media is that there is a disconnect between what audiences want and what execs want and what business models will allow for. And that really has a stifling effect on innovation. And so I think that was our early key and our early success. And I also think that we weren't afraid to make mistakes, which in media can be a difficult thing to own up to. But if something didn't work, we were audience led, we were audience first. And it meant that we could, again, be nimble, be responsive and iterate. And I think that that's a very underrated thing in the media and something that should be adopted more.
So I want to talk about boathism. And I read something you wrote recently that we can create an environment where news-focused creators can do their own entrepreneurial thing and be their own person and build their own brand, but they can also do that with the support of a structure around them that provides fact-checking and editorial quality. And you ended up in a bit of like a tussle online where people
I was going to say, you found my LinkedIn fights.
Yeah. And I'm like, I find that really fascinating because I see so often in business that the real magic is in the fact that we can do this and we can do this. And I can't always figure out why other people don't see that. And is it because they're too purist? They go, well, if you're that, you can't be that. Or maybe it's just that doing both is hard. But I want you to start by talking a bit about boathism.
Yeah, I love this. And I was quite surprised by the feedback to that because I think what I have built and what my team has built is that boathism. It's straddling the old age and the new age of media. And that has been almost a tension point because there are so many good parts of legacy media that need to be maintained, editorial integrity and, fact checkers and editors. But there is something missing there. There is a huge trust deficit. And that's what we bring from the new age. And I think when you can merge those two, infuse those two together, that's where the magic lies. You don't, need these things to be mutually exclusive. I think that there is huge benefit to having the best of both worlds.
But potentially there was an easier business to build that just lent into, let's just build lots of trust by being engaging and building community and leave the fact-checking behind, whereas you've actually built the difficult business, right?
Yeah. I mean, can you build trust that way or can you build long-lasting trust that way, I guess is my question. I think what we decided and certainly what we found over the years of building is that trust is something that is very slow to build and very quick to lose. And we wanted to build the foundation of trust so that, they could go forward and form whatever opinions and do whatever they wanted with that information. But that takes a really long time. And sure, it's certainly very attractive to have a hot take and a nice opinion on the internet go viral and there's your business. But I don't think that has the same longevity as building a trusting relationship with a young audience who come to you for a specific reason.
When you hear the phrase post-truth, what does it make you feel?
Depends what day you get me on. Do I think we live in a post-truth world? I do think that there are some elements to that are true. I think what we were talking about before, this idea of unless a truth reflects back to you what you believe about the world, then it can't be true. I think I'm seeing that more and more, and I think that is a really worrying trend. Do I think that we can come back from that? Yes. And I think that there are signs that there is appetite for, again, just down the line truth, which shouldn't be controversial. But I think it's really difficult. And I think that we are navigating through a really challenging environment, especially on social media right now.
And maybe going to get more so. Like I always reflect on how, I don't know if you know this, but I studied economics at university and I did both because I was bad at it, but also because of the things it missed out. So the one thing I didn't study in my pretty, not great economics degree, I didn't study behavioral economics. And I feel all of us should be forced to do like a primer in behavioral economics because what it reveals are these sort of fundamental weaknesses. Like if the human brain is an operating system, behavioral economics kind of shows you what are the backdoor weaknesses. And one of them is this notion of confirmation bias, that our brains are sort of ravenous for finding little bits of evidence that confirm what we already believe to be true. And you know this, and this is the world that we have navigated for a long time, and whether it's the world of Brexit or, Trump 1.0 in 2016. This is not new news. When people talk about Facebook breaking democracy, they're not talking about today, they're talking about a decade ago. But now we're heading into this synthetic world of AI and deep fakes and this sort of abundance and speed with which that confirmation can just be manufactured and not even need a human, not even need a room full of, hackers from whatever country or, how does that make you feel?
Yeah. little bit terrified. I think that it reaffirms, though, what we're doing. I think it, for me, brings to the fore two main things. Firstly, media literacy. I think that we have just, as a society, skimmed over how critical media literacy is. Every time I say this publicly, I have teachers telling me that they are teaching it in schools. I certainly, for one, can't recall a comprehensive media literacy module at school. And I think as we move through this very terrifying new world, there need to be the kind of critical analysis skills for people to be able to decipher truth from fiction. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, though, is that, and I guess this goes to the creator point before, we need to be prioritizing as much as we can human connection with the news. And so for us, that's how can we show you the working out behind the story that we've done? How can we show you what it took to prepare for an interview with a politician? What can it do? All of those sorts of things, I think, bring back the human face of the internet and journalism. And I think that those two things taken together are the best antidote to what we're seeing, which is obviously a huge disruption, not just to our sector, but to the entire world. And I feel really excited by the opportunity that those two things together give us and allow us to do.
I couldn't agree with you more on media literacy and the need for education. As things stand, what are you seeing emerge around how young audiences are at the moment deciding or using to decide whether a source or a piece of information is trustworthy or not? What do you think they are looking for? What tools are they using?
I think at the moment, and this is probably kind of years in the making, there is just a kind of natural posture of mistrusting the source. So people aren't coming to something with a intellectual curiosity. I think they're coming with just a natural posture of this is wrong, this is false, this is AI generated, whatever it is. So I think that's the starting point, which is an interesting starting point to go back from. I mean, we were always taught that you have to check multiple sources, but again, confirmation bias, that if you can find some verified account on X that is saying the same thing that you are saying, then somehow that goes as truth. So I think that the tools that were once available, especially to journalists, even now aren't available to the general public. So it's becoming increasingly more difficult. And for us, sometimes, we'll get messages or comments saying this was written by AI. And we're like, no, this was written by a human. But the fact that we have to step that out, I think, is the problem. And that the natural assessment is that this hasn't been done by a human. That's where the concern lies. That's the starting point.
There's a lot of conversation in the wider world of brand about the need to start to inject flaws almost deliberately to go back to sort of badly overexposed flash photography, because even though your product's going to look not great, at least people go, look, they took a photograph, they didn't just generate that. But then you wonder how quickly the AI will be able to replicate that and those signs of authenticity as well.
But I do think that taps into another trend, which is that my cohort have grown up on TikTok, where that kind of unpolished brand and that authenticity is king or queen on those apps. And so I think that actually taps into another consumption habit that we've seen that brands are certainly leaning into, and does lend itself to other things we're seeing play out.
Talking of the wider brand world, a conversation I'm having a lot with people at the moment is that we are in the process of leaving the age of search and entering into the age of answers. That, we're not going to say, right, well, I need to buy a house. Tell me who are the best real estate agents or who are the best mortgage brokers, and ask Google and maybe we'll look at the first page of results. We're just going to go, what's the answer? Maximum short list of 3. Just tell me the answer. To what extent do you anticipate that people will start to consume their news that way, that they won't seek out trusted sources? They'll just ask Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or other options are available and say, just generate me a primer on this?
I'd say that we're already there. So we've seen with legacy media publishers who are reliant on web that they've seen somewhere between an 80 to 90% downturn in search traffic, and that used to be the kind of prime of the business. And it's now that young people are just reading the AI overview at the top. And so for us, it's how are we surfacing there? How can we make sure that there is reputable fact there and doing things, GEO rather than SEO? That's part of the equation that, like, had you asked me a year ago whether we'd be doing this, would have not known what GEO was. But I think that we're already there. And I think that we as a business need to be keeping up with these trends, not waiting for them to happen, because we need to be ahead of them. Just like consumption habits change that put social media and news together, I think AI and news and search and news are seeing a huge transformation at the moment.
Zara just used one of my absolutely favorite words when it comes to building brands and building businesses, which is this idea of moment. What does the moment offer you and what does the moment require of you? And right at the start, they saw this moment in time when they could help their friends care more about the news. Then more recently, you just heard Zara use this acronym GEO, not SEO, not search engine optimization, but generative engine optimization, effectively understanding how your content is going to show up in a world of AI. But sometimes moments also present challenges and threats to your business model. And that happened very early on in the history of the Daily Aus.
Yeah, so it was day one of being a business, because we raised that round of capital, quit our jobs, started our full-time jobs as founders of the Daily Aus, just Sam and I. And on that day, Facebook announced it was taking news off its platform, and we had just taken...
Such beautiful timing.
Oh, yeah. Looking back, beautiful timing. Right then, didn't feel very beautiful.
Did they send you flowers and champagne as well?
It was amazing. We had just taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from people saying, we're going to build something amazing on social media. And then social media said, no, you're not. And so...
Quick sidebar, how many panicked calls from investors did you get as they read that news?
You know what? They were actually amazing. We were sitting in an investor's office at the time, because obviously we didn't have an office. We were sitting kind of on the ground trying to make do. And I remember he poked his head up and was like, what happens now? And we were like, we'll figure it out. And so we sat that day, we went down to the cafe in Paddington, and we sat that day and said, right, they're going to take this away from us. At that point, it wasn't off on Instagram, but we knew that, it was kind of a matter of time. And we created a newsletter that day. And again, it was just by pure necessity. That newsletter today has 500,000 subscribers across a few newsletters that we run, and brings in the most revenue of any product we have. And had that external pressure not happened, I don't know that we would have pivoted. We needed that wake-up call that, in fact, one call between Mark Zuckerberg and Josh Frydenberg can really blow it all up for us, and that was too risky. And we've seen that sort of thing happen over the years. We've had to double down on those other diversification methods, and all of those things, I think, taken together, have been really good for the business and have made us much healthier.
I think we had a coffee not too long after that apocalyptic or, near
death.
Visualizing death moment, right? And I reckon if I'd offered you then a newsletter that had 100,000 subscribers, you'd have taken it.
Yeah.
So to get to the scale you've got, and I look at the numbers, and I think I saw the other day that The Guardian Australia's readership has now started to outstrip some of the Fairfax and some of the traditional legs. It's amazing, those shifts. And so to be at those numbers is extraordinary.
And the newsletter's the best. There was this, I don't know if it's a myth or if it was just under research. There was an idea that young people wouldn't take to newsletters because they weren't on email. It wasn't as sexy as socials. It is the most intimate form of relationship that you can have with an audience. And that newsletter audience is exceptional. And oftentimes when I run into people on the street, they talk about the introduction to that day's newsletter. And I think that it is such a different type of relationship, as is podcast. This is another very different format. And we want to be for everyone. So if you're not a reader and you're a listener, then you can get it somewhere else. We want to be for everyone.
But podcasts and emails, they've got something in common, which is they're permission-based, they're sort of 100%. Consent-led, and they're intimate.
You're choosing to engage with it.
Can you just give really quickly, for anyone who's trying to figure out how to use email, the Zara Seidler 30-second TED Talk on how to make email a positive weapon and not just be something that just gets unopened and chucked into the junk time and again? Because I reckon a lot of people listening to this will be like, my business sends emails. Yeah. No one ever reads them. No one ever clicks on them. And I know I get lots of emails that I never read and never click on.
Yeah. Don't make it a marketing-led tool. Make it a content-led tool. For us, we are not aggregating marketing stuff. We're not aggregating stuff that's already there. We are writing this native to email. It reads as if it is written just for you and just for your email. And that is a very different model to just pulling all the stories, having some hyperlinks and taking people off it. Make it intentional because it pays off.
And make it a gift.
Yeah.
Not an ask.
Yeah.
There's a little gift drops in your inbox every day.
Yeah, like how lucky. You get to read about how cooked the world is every morning at 7 a.m. Aren't you so lucky?
When you put it like that. Hey, I just want to touch on something and just rewind to that day, because you just triggered something in me, which is the importance of choosing great investors. It wasn't something I planned to talk to you about, but I think it's just that moment is so critical, because that moment also goes differently had you made different choices about who you would allow to invest in you, / had they invested for different reasons.
Yep.
And if you had cynical people who'd invested in a business model and a fast path to growth, they didn't really care about who you were, who Sam was, they just trusted in the model. And then on day one, they see the models potentially got exploded.
Yeah.
That's very different to a world where they chose you and you chose them, and people trust people and they're like, you got this, you'll figure it out.
So different. And I mean, we were so lucky. When we approached investors, we had no revenue model to be spoken of. We had no idea how we were going to make money. And again, I think because these people were values aligned, they were mission aligned, it meant that they could withstand the pressures that came with investing in a media business. And they took a huge risk on us. I mean, we were completely unproven. I was 21. Like, God knows who I should have been doing or what I would have been doing. And they believed in us, and it meant that we could take the risks and try and experiment. Without that, TDA wouldn't exist, without a doubt.
It's kind of amazing, isn't it? And,
it is.
And, I look back and go, why did people invest? Would I today? I
don't know that I'd invest
I hope
in
that
me.
I would have had the wisdom to invest in 4 Pillars or the Daily Aus.
Yeah.
And I look back and go, the only reason for them to do that was because of the people.
Yeah.
And because of the people and the talents and the energy and the vision we brought to it. Not the business model.
No, they believe in founders. And we heard that time and time again. They believed in Sam and Zara. And that is a huge honor and a huge respect. And we just have to work every day to make sure that that was the right investment for them.
You're now diversifying quite a lot to the point where you have multiple different newsletters. You've also got this sort of new, almost like consultancy arm where you're trying to educate businesses and leaders about young audiences and how to deal with them. What are you doing? And how are you, not what are you doing? But
what am I doing here?
What are you doing? And how are you choosing what not to do? Because there must be so many tempting paths that you have to say, no, that is too far from the mission. That is not going to help us to get where we want to go.
Yeah, I think what we are doing is choosing what is our unique value proposition. And as we've spoken about at length, it's trust. And so we're building ecosystems around that trust. So for us, the original business model was advertising. That is how a lot of, media businesses survive, thrive, whatever it is. But we realized quite a while ago that we were also building this machine and this vehicle of trusted behaviors, attitudes, and ideas of young people that other people didn't have, wanted to know, but couldn't access. And so with Futureproof, that our way of building that up and having young people's voices heard is, can we spin out a consulting arm that is separate to TDA but uses the insights to really make what Gen Z is saying and the future generations and bring it to the C-suites at, the biggest companies in this country, because they're trying to make decisions about what the next generation want, both with their, wallet and with their employment, but they aren't using contemporary information. And so we're just trying to plug that gap because we've got so much of that data at our fingertips.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It's almost anywhere where there is a trust deficit, where
we're
there is
there.
an engagement deficit, where there is a relevancy deficit.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're always going to fix all of those deficits, but you can at least add value and provide a view and a perspective.
Correct. We're not fixing it for, the big four, we're just trying to create, again, almost this foundation of fact. It's don't work on assumption, work on fact. We can tell you what they're thinking about AI. We can tell you what they're thinking about working from home. You don't need to have these, multi-month long surveys. We'll tell you, and then work with that foundation of fact to create good policy at your organization.
What is the number one thing about the business that exists today that surprises you, that you really couldn't have anticipated when you began?
I think the fact that I have close to 30 people showing up and sharing in that mission, I think it felt like a very personal mission to Sam and I. And the fact that it is not so personal and that it is shared among people who have taken a huge risk, quit their jobs in very established in very established newsrooms and come to work with us. I think had I thought about that on the day I quit my job, I could have never conceptualized it. And I think there is nothing more gratifying than having a shared mission. And I think so much of what we're trying to do is build community. And the fact that we've even been able to build community internally at our organization is my greatest source of pride and something I could have never expected.
And to go back to the start, it's a both community. It's the fact that you're pulling in incredible content creators and influencers who want to become more authoritative and trusted, and you're pulling in people from traditional newsrooms and sort of legacy media organizations who want to join. What do you hope will surprise you in 10 years' time? Which is a weird, stupid question, because if you can expect it, you can't entirely surprise you.
Yeah.
But what might be the biggest surprise or gift that the future gives you as
Well,
a
I
business?
think that there is a fear, I think, that we consider around we don't want necessarily the audience to age up with us, that we think that there is a lot that services older generations, and we want to be for everyone, but we think that young audiences are really underrepresented when it comes to media. And so I think I would just be so thrilled if the next generation of 15 to 18-year-olds who are currently, 10 are reading what we do then, and that we have managed to continue to service this incredibly underserviced group. I think I'd be thrilled with that.
And I think you are just a phenomenal example of a leader and an entrepreneur on a mission and doing amazing things. And you happen to also be an extraordinary woman. So thank you, Zara Seidler.
Thanks for having me.
StoryWork was brought to you in partnership with Slingshot. As you've heard in today's episode, stories really matter, and there is no story more important than the one you tell your customers. But finding the right time, place, channel, and medium through which to tell that story is critical, and that's where my great friends at Slingshot come in. Slingshot pride themselves on developing creative media strategies to propel their clients further, faster. You can find out more about the brilliant work that Slingshot does, helping brands find their audiences, tell their stories, and achieve their objectives at slingshot.com.au. And talking about finding out more, you can find out more about this and every episode of StoryWork, including all the show notes and all of my key learnings from every conversation over on Substack.